In this episode, we're going to talk about a band that branded their sound as good time music. They made 3 really great albums, one okay album, and one that was a clinker. And they were only active from 1965 until 1969. But like a lot of bands of that period, they had a lot of internal and external problems. There were band members that got fired. There was drug busts. There were jail times. And they had some of their concerts and their record sales get boycotted. In spite of all that, they got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And they really brought on the heat when they gave us Summer in the City. Yep, talking about the Lovin Spoonful, let's drop the needle. The Lovin Spoonful actually got their start in Greenwich Village during the folk scene as the Mugwumps. 2 of their members were John Sebastian and Zalman Janowski. The other 2 members were Cass Elliot and Denny Doherty, who became half of the Mamas and Papas. But soon, John and Zal were joined by Steve Boone on bass and Joe Butler on drums. And their first album came out in 1965, and it was propelled by 2 hit singles. The singles are Do You Believe in Magic, which broke into the top 10 at number 9, and Did You Ever Have to Make Up Your Mind, which soared to number 2. Both of these were written by John Sebastian. I also like Blues in the Bottle, Fishing Blues, Wild About My Lovin', Younger Girl, and On the Road Again. And these last 2 were also written by John Sebastian. And John Sebastian played an instrument called the auto harp. And I remember we were all enamored with that instrument and the sound that it made. And the band that we had in high school and when I was first in college called The Darkness, which I've talked about before, our bass player, Brad, bought an auto harp. And he actually would play it on stage when we would perform Lovin Spoonful songs. The Lovin Spoonful were on a roll right after their first album, and they went to the UK and became friends with the Beatles. The Spoonful toured extensively, and in May of 1966, they released their second album called Daydream. And on this album, John Sebastian writes or co-writes all but one song. There are the 2 hit singles, Daydream, which reached number 2 on the charts, and You Didn't Have to Be So Nice, which hit number 10. But then I also like Jug Band Music, There She Is, Didn't Want to Have to Do It, and Let the Boy Rock and Roll. Now, I told you the Spoonful became friends with the Beatles. In fact, Paul McCartney has been quoted saying that he wrote Good Day Sunshine because he was trying to emulate the sound the Spoonful had on Daydream. The Spoonful certainly had some good friends, but they also had some that were not as nice. They had just finished recording Summer in the City, and they were on a tour on the West Coast. Their problem occurs in San Francisco in the May of 1966. Now, Steve Boone has written a book called Hotter Than a Matchhead, and I strongly recommend you check this out. In the book, Steve talks about what happened to him and Zal that night in San Francisco and how it caused the breakup of the Lovin Spoonful. Apparently, Zal had some friends in San Francisco that were going to throw a party, and so he invited Steve to come along with him. Now, Joe and John decided they didn't want to go. But according to Steve, they said, but if you can score any weed for us while you're there, bring it on back. So Zal and Steve went to the party. And there were a lot of people there, and apparently there was a lot of drugs there too. And they had a really good time. And they got ready to leave. And Steve says to Zal, hey, did you get any weed to take back to the guys? And Zal said, no, I forgot. Hang on, I'll go get it. And so he left and he came back. He had the weed with him. They get in the rental car and they had driven only about 2 blocks when they get pulled over by the San Francisco police. Now Zal panics and throws the weed underneath the seat of the car. But it's to no luck because the police decide to search the car anyway. And they find the weed and bust Steve and Zal. And when they take them both to the jail and they're getting their belongings from them, they discover that Steve has got hashish in his pocket. So he gets another charge against him. And now Zal is worried because he's a Canadian and he thinks this is going to get him deported. Steve, on the other hand, thinks, we'll be in jail overnight, then things will sort of work itself out and everything will be okay. But everything was not okay. As it turns out, the only way that Zal and Steve could avoid jail terms or Zal being deported was if they agreed to introduce a narc, saying he was their friend, to their friends that had held the party. And if any of their friends then ended up getting arrested on drug busts, then the charges against Zal and Steve would be relieved. Now, both Zal and Steve didn't want to go along with this, but eventually they realized they had no choice. They did invite this narc to a party, introduced him to some of their friends, and yeah, some of their friends got busted. And then the charges against Steve and Zal were dropped. They thought things would get better. It didn't. A side note is in August of 1966, they went to see the Beatles perform at Shea Stadium. But they went as fans. And they were seated kind of behind the dugout. And then all of a sudden a commotion broke out because fans started to recognize who they were. And when the Beatles and the management heard about this, they quickly sent security out to get the Spoonful and take them backstage, which was inside the dugout in the locker room where the Beatles had as a dressing room. The Spoonful carries on, and in November of 1966, they released their third album, Hums of the Lovin Spoonful. And this is my favorite Spoonful album. There are great songs like Loving You, Best Friends, Voodoo in My Basement, Darling Companion, Rain on the Roof, Coconut Grove, Nashville Cats, and of course, the massive hit, Summer in the City. Now, it's clear to almost everyone that the major talent in the Lovin Spoonful is the singer-songwriter John Sebastian. But this doesn't sit so well with the other members of the band, particularly Zal, who didn't want to be just a sideman to John. So what he would do is he'd take out his frustrations by lashing out in the studio and on some of their performances. A very notable thing happened when they appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show. And John is singing the very sweet and lovely Darlin' Be Home Soon. And Zal is clowning around behind him. In fact, he even has a rubber duck on his guitar. And at one point, he gets in front of John and badly lip syncs the lyrics, ruining the mood of the song. Now, of course, this makes John Sebastian furious. Then to throw gasoline on the fire of the tension that's already inside of the Spoonful, the news of Zal and Steve's bust goes public. An underground newspaper in San Francisco publishes an article where it lays out the whole story and how that Steve and Zal saved their own skins by turning a narc on to their friends who then got busted as a result. The story gets picked up by an underground newspaper in LA, and then it goes nationwide. And immediately, the Lovin Spoonful are branded as part of the establishment. And the hip underground movement won't have anything to do with them. Then, radio stations start banning their songs from airwaves. Their album sales drop. Their concerts are starting to be boycotted. It is not a good time for the Lovin Spoonful. Now, John was fed up with everything that was going on, and he was particularly fed up with Zal. So he called a band meeting with the other two members and said, look, Steve and Joe, either Zal goes or I go. The result was Zal was fired from the Lovin Spoonful, and they brought in Jerry Yester to replace him. In 1967, they released their first album with Jerry Yester called Everything's Playin'. Again, most of the songs are written by John. I like She's Still a Mystery, Younger Generation, 6 O'Clock, Money, and Close Your Eyes. Now, it's not a bad album, but the good time music magic is clearly gone. and shortly thereafter, John Sebastian leaves the group. The Spoonful are now a trio, and they only have one more album in them. And in 1969, they release my least favorite Spoonful album, which is called Revolution 69. And it's credited to the Lovin Spoonful featuring Joe Butler. Now, it doesn't sound, to my ears, like a Lovin Spoonful album. Well, how could it? There are no John Sebastian songs on this record. The trio does do okay with a song called Never Going Back, which was written by Jon Stewart. But otherwise, it's a forgettable record, and very soon the Lovin Spoonful are no more. Now, John Sebastian went on to have a very successful solo career. After he got fired from the Lovin Spoonful, Zal did make one album called Alive and Well in Argentina. In fact, most of the Spoonful play on it. But then he kind of turned his back on music, went back home to Canada, and became an entrepreneur and opened up restaurants. Joe Butler owned a recording studio for a time. And Steve Boone, well, he had a rough life. And according to his book, he actually became a drug smuggler for a while. But then he straightened his life out, and now he and Joe are touring with a current lineup that they're calling the Lovin Spoonful. Like so many classic rock bands of the period, the Lovin Spoonful made a lot of incredible good time music. And you know, when you hear it, you can't help but smile. So go pull out those albums, put them on your turntable, sit back and let that smile come across your face. Thank you, John Sebastian. Thank you, Lovin Spoonful, for all of the memories. Thank you for watching, and keep a-rockin'. If you liked this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out.